I get it. I completely get it. All right, so we are pushing to YouTube. I wish I had pushed it to YouTube right before you said that, because I think that would make a great live stream session, conversation starter.
I'm happy to bring up my chickens at any time, anytime.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so people are starting to join. Welcome everyone to the one and only panel of Newsletter Fest. We'll have to see how this goes and see if we want to do more of these next year. I am really excited about this topic. We will start right at 12:30, so I won't make any housekeeping announcements until that time, because you don't want to have to listen to me say all of that twice. And it's a little less now because we are on the last day, so I don't have to say enter to win the contest or go vote, because all the voting is done. But I am going to switch host over to Seth. Okay, he is now the host, and it is 12:30. Welcome to the panel session of Newsletter Fest. This is called Blurred Lines. We are going to be talking with both marketers and journalists. Mary Ellen Slayter of Managing Editor Magazine, if you'll wave at everyone, Mary Ellen is the panel host. So I'm going to hand it over to her right after I get done with hey, welcome to Zoom, all that stuff. And we have some amazing speakers. I don't know if you want them to introduce themselves or for you to do it, but I'm going to yield the power to control that to you. But a few things about Newsletter Fest. We're so excited you're here. It's been an amazing week. We have spoken with so many newsletter creators and newsletter consultants and experts and people who know about selling sponsorship, people who are experts at paid newsletters. It's been a really fun event. We have a lot of footage from that. You can go check out everything if you want the instant replays from sessions you might have missed over on YouTube on the Curated channel. Curated is hosting this event, and we do have a Slack community that we created just for this event because we thought about the things that you miss out on when you go to a live conference that you don't get when you go to an online conference. As part of that is just connecting with individual people who are in your industry and who you want to maintain relationships with after the event. So Seth is going to drop the link to that Slack community, or he might already have, in the chat. And we'd love to have you come in there. I know it's the last day of Newsletter Fest, but we expect for this to live on long after Newsletter Fest because we've got great resources in there for newsletter creators. We've got a way to introduce yourself, drop the link to your latest issue, even drop newsletter resources or list jobs that you might have that are newsletter related. So we hope to see that grow and to be kind of a fun community that is founded in the event itself. So that's all I have for you, aside from the fact that at 5 p.m. we have our last session. So that will be hour 23 or 24 that Seth and I have been on Zoom this week, in addition to some regular meetings that popped up. And we will be announcing the winners of the Newsletters of the Year awards that people have been voting on all week, as well as just wrapping things up and celebrating newsletters worldwide. So expect a kind of party-esque session at 5 p.m. because it's 5 o'clock Friday in my world. All right, handing it over to Mary Ellen. I'm excited about this panel. Take it away.
All right, hi. Yeah, so thanks, Ashley. So I am Mary Ellen Slayter. I'm the CEO and founder of RevCap, and I also publish a magazine for content marketers called Managing Editor, which is very meta. We even have a managing editor. He's not here today. He's off work, but so it's funny because you said, there's something that you said that actually I want to talk to this panel about. It's really important. You said they're marketers and journalists. And I would say, I still consider myself to be a bit of both, depending on what role I am playing in a particular moment. To me, journalism is about a discipline, a verification. And I've always been more of a feature journalist. So I felt like what I do now as a marketer in many cases is a natural extension of that. And that's where I think the idea of these blurred lines, that's where this gets really interesting to me, because I've been an editor for the Washington Post for many years. I worked on the financial desk. I wrote a career advice column. I then worked at a company called SmartBrief, which many of you may be familiar with. We publish lots and lots of emails there, and I spent 3 years there helping build their email newsletter capability without partners. And so that taught me a lot about email. I did not know about email the way that I knew about email until my 3 years at SmartBrief, and now I know a lot about it. So what I would like to do is go around, and as I'll kind of call on each of you, and you can very quickly introduce yourself and tell me actually the answer to that question. Do you consider yourself a marketer, a journalist, or something else? And I'm going to start with Sarah. Sarah, what's your story?
Okay, hi everybody. Hi Mary Ellen and the panel, a great panel. I definitely consider myself a journalist because that's what I've been doing since the start of my career. I've worked on various national newspapers. I'm in London, by the way, you might be able to tell by the accent and the blurry background. So I've worked for a number of national newspapers and also spent some time at the BBC. So definitely see myself as a journalist, and that is how I describe myself. I just started this week on Monday as head of newsletters at the FT, the Financial Times. And before that, I was, thank you, Ashley. It's been an exhausting week. And before that, I was 3 years at the Telegraph in London, running their newsletters, where I set up a brand new department. We didn't have a newsletter department before. So I've learned an awful lot. I did newsletters before then as well, but it wasn't the entirety of my job. And from about last summer, I also moved into what I call, as opposed to editorial newsletters, emails, which is more marketing, events, and all the other things, subscription, retention, churn, win back, to look after those and be a kind of consultant on those at the Telegraph as well. So I could see there's an awful lot of similarities, but there's also obviously an awful lot of differences. One of the main ones being, with an editorial newsletter, you sign up for the newsletter itself, you want the content of that newsletter, and it should, although it might have lots of things that it's aiming for, particularly, to keep you as a customer or perhaps to sell you a subscription, that's not its sole aim. It's not marketing in itself, as opposed to a marketing email, which is the clues in the name, is trying to market you something and sell you something. And also marketing emails tend to be less habit forming, don't they? I mean, they don't necessarily go at the same time every week with that. It's not so much about the content. So what I do is much more about the content of editorial newsletters. We had 50 by the time I left the Telegraph, and at the moment we have 26 at the FT, of which only a small number are automated, most are curated, and some of them are very, very premium. So that's probably a quick summary.
Cool. All right, Jenny, what about you?
Hi, everyone. I would say I definitely consider myself more a marketer. I don't have the journalistic chops, but I started my media career at Industry Dive, a B2B media company in DC.
SmartBrief competitor.
Yes. Yes, very much so.
I love Industry Dive. They're good people.
Yes, definitely. So, got to, 32 publications, I think 50 or 60 newsletters, a ton of newsletters. So that's kind of how I got my feet wet. Was able to really work closely with the really strong editorial team at Industry Dive, where I learned a ton from them and, kind of understood how audience development and marketing can really work well with an editorial team. And then after Industry Dive, I joined Morning Brew pretty early on, worked there for a few years, and just recently left to kind of get a change of pace, get out of the media industry. But newsletters, email, media, always near and dear to my heart. So, yeah.
All right, Chris, how about you?
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I work at Atlassian, specifically for the Trello product, and I am 100% consider myself a marketer. I have zero journalist experience other than just consuming what y'all put out kind of thing. But so Atlassian, we sell software, and a big part of our kind of experience is we have this blog with a lot of like really helpful content. That's more Leah and Rani's team, which you'll hear from shortly, I think. And I help with our run our email marketing program. And so I'm involved very logistically with getting our newsletter out the door. But I have touched every bit of a traditional newsletter process, I think.
It builds character.
It does.
All right, Ryan, how about you?
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Ryan Johnston. I'm the CEO of 6 a.m. City. We publish hyper local newsletters or a network of them at the time. So I consider myself a consumer. I'm glad that Chris mentioned that. And I think that because I'm a consumer first, I'm definitely a marketer first, and then more of a journalist. I have no journalism background, and I think that that's really helped us as we've approached the way that we tackle journalism, which is making people really care and getting their attention. I had the luxury of, before starting 6 a.m., working and running a business publication and a local media publication, where I worked with a lot of legacy, 30-year, really talented local journalists, and they just didn't focus enough on anticipating the questions and getting the attention, which I think is more marketing mindset. And I think at the end of the day, everyone's a consumer. So no matter what you're trying to communicate, I think that having the thought of how am I going to get people to care about whatever I'm writing about, whether it's niche or kind of a mass media audience, I think it would I think traditional journalists would do better if they spent a little bit more attention focused on the data of what people actually care about. And I'm not talking about clickbait. I'm talking about copy. I'm talking about ways that you look to pull people in. And so, yeah, definitely a consumer first, marketer second, journalism third.
I don't know.
I'm just jumping in. Sorry, I'm jumping in, Mary Ellen, on that comment about traditional journalists. Just be a little careful before. I wouldn't put all marketers in one bucket. You need to be a bit careful about journalists, and I think you'll find that nearly every journalist organization now is very, very aware of the data and very aware of what works, and using newsletters with the aim of engagement, not sales, which is what I would say is the difference between sort of marketing and editorial journalism. And an entire career in journalism, very aware, especially I started work before there was the internet, so it was easier then to try and ignore the consumer, but now you can't. So right. Just wanted to mention that.
See, Sarah's being polite and British about it, but I'm going to tell you, Ryan, those were fighting words. We will have a duel after this for my honor. All right. Rani, what about you?
Hi, my name is Rani. I'm on the Trello team with Chris and Leah, and I work in all things brand and content. So I would definitely consider myself a marketer, but with a generous and healthy smattering of the storytelling side of journalism. I'm the managing editor of the Trello blog. So whether it's looking through it from a lens of, we try to get them, have the most accurate research on there, the most up-to-date trends, but at the same time, we want to make sure we're looking at, writing about what our audience needs and wants, whether it's empathy-focused content or how to use our product. So we're constantly trying to tell the story of Trello and also the story of our customers. And as far as newsletters go, I run our editorial newsletter. So we have a biweekly newsletter that goes out to our users that is really fun to kind of look at data for, because we get to understand, especially as we go into like a more hybrid workplace, like how are people feeling, where are they clicking on? So that's been a journey for us as a content engine, and seeing, how are people learning and interacting with us. As well as email, I also run social. So as far as the trends we see on social or how people just candidly feel about us, it's really interesting to understand, what do we need to create? So if you ever see Taco from Trello in your inbox, it is also Rani from Trello. So feel free to shoot me a hello anytime on Twitter. It's also me. And yeah, a little bit about me. Do I popcorn next, or is that you, Mary Ellen?
Oh, no, it's going to be Leah. Leah, tell me, are you a marketer or a journalist or something else?
Yeah, hi, I'm Leah. I lead our brand strategy at Trello. I've been there for 5 years, but I've been working in a mix of online publications and marketing over the last decade. So I think the two for me have blended so much to the point that I really believe that the place of content for brands is to be a part of a person's day-to-day. So that's taking on the responsibility of putting out great journalistic level content, and then choosing the right time and place to then bring solutions to those problems that the customers have. We have a mandate on our blog for Trello that it needs to be at the quality of the New York Times. And I'm happy to say that with that level of expectation, one of my articles did get cited from Trello blog in the New York Times. So I can tell you that the proof is in the pudding, that it's really good to have a really high quality of standard and use research, have topical content that speaks to their needs. And then once you build that trust, there's a time and place to come in with the product and the message that you have for the company that you are backing.
So Ashley, I'm going to throw this question back at you then before we dig into our questions. Are you a journalist or a marketer or both?
I feel like I'm totally both. Also, I wanted to mention that Leah does have a newsletter of her own as well that I interviewed her about, which is Werk, and that's Werk with an E for content, women in content marketing, right, Leah?
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So I also run my own personal newsletter. And the reason I do that is because I just interview women in content marketing about their position on this. This is a great question that we might interview, but it's also about opening the hood and talking about the process behind the process and understanding what our strategies and motivations are as women in content marketing, because it's an art and a science. So thanks, Ashley.
Yeah. We need to throw this question at Seth too. Seth, what are you? What kind of
Yeah, definitely consider myself a marketer. So when I was first brought on to Simple Focus proper, I was dipping my toes in journalism, and that was an explosion of, oh man, that was very quickly. I was like, this is not what I meant to do. And so luckily they kept me on as just kind of the person that did random things. And then Ashley came on the scene and was like, wait, doesn't Seth have a degree in marketing? I was like, I sure do. And so then she started using me for marketing. So yeah, I would definitely consider myself a mostly marketer.
So this is interesting. I was sitting here listening to Rani describe her job, and I was thinking, wow, she apparently doesn't sleep. And then somebody mentioned that you wrote a book on self-care. When did you write this book?
I did. Not much to do with our newsletters, but it does have to do with the blog. So I wrote a book called Wisdom from a Humble Jellyfish. It was published almost exactly a year ago, in April, and it's a self-care book about, I love biology, I love nature, I love animals. So it's about animal biology, and we can learn from them about productivity and self-care. And this was actually, it was great for, as the pandemic kind of peaked and people need something calm. So timing was like kind of infamously kind of nice, but not for a great reason. But also that concept actually came from a conversation Leah and I had during like a company offsite. And we're like, that'd be such a cool Trello blog concept. And it just kind of speaks to, even now when we're like voluntelling our fellow coworkers, like, we want you to write for the blog. We think you have a great viewpoint. A lot of these pieces can turn into larger kind of publications. And this was something, it's still in the Trello blog. If you search for nature and then my name or the word nature, this was a topic we wanted to talk to our audience about, just because it speaks to everybody. So if not for newsletters, write for your local blog, your company blog, because it could blossom into something that people really can find useful. But yeah, this was last year it's published. So I had some downtime and had some support from an organization that, like Leah said, like really value just quality of writing. So, being on a team that is actually full of really heavy and talented writers, I got a lot of help and a lot of just support. So yeah, check it out. It's maybe in your local bookstore, but inspired by the Trello blog.
Actually, I've asked Seth to post a link in the chat so everyone can find it. So, all right, so jumping into our questions, let's talk about newsletters. And Sarah, I'm going to come back to you with this first question. When you worked on things, you're working in a mass publication, a mass business publication, and you mentioned you also do some very niche, very premium newsletters. Which do you think is harder to produce, a mass email or a super niche email? And at the same time, which one's more satisfying or more interesting?
I suppose it just depends on what you mean by niche, what you mean by mass produced. I mean, when I was at the Telegraph, I set up during the pandemic, following up from what Rani says, we had a massive section that we launched called You Are Not Alone, to let people know that they weren't alone, and we would communicate with them, and it was all departments together. But I set up a newsletter called You Are Not Alone, and it was lots of positive things in there that people were doing. And as time moved on, I turned that into a good news newsletter, which is sort of quite niche, and it was really fun to write. And it was really fun to look for positive things and interview people about the difference they were making to their communities and the good stories they were finding and the ways they were living. And I always put in some great cat videos and things like that just to cheer people up. And when I left, I wrote saying, I'm leaving, this is my last one. And I got the most amazing responses from people saying, I've never contacted anyone before, but you got me through the pandemic. And I'm so grateful. And, I look forward to this coming. At the beginning, it was every day. Then I was also doing my day job running all the newsletters. So I changed it to twice a week. So I suppose that was quite niche, although the numbers were, 25,000 or something. So, but, for the Telegraph, that was a sort of middle-ish size. But our biggest newsletter there was a morning briefing type newsletter, well over, coming up to 400,000 numbers. But I think because I'm in a slightly different world and I'm talking about the editorial newsletters here, I don't think there is particularly a big difference. I think the guy who wrote that really enjoyed writing that, and I really enjoyed writing mine. And some of the smaller numbers, now I'm at the FT with, there's some more niche, very specific topic based, but very premium, high quality newsletters. And I'm sure they enjoy reading them. And I'm sure that the people who read them get so much out of them. So, I love lots of things about newsletters. I think they're a fantastic tool. And funny enough, when I was at the Times in London, I wrote a blog. So I see a big connection between blogs and newsletters. So I don't think that I personally think you get pleasure of writing something for 100 people, if that's what you're doing, or for 3 million people. We sent out a newsletter from the editor every week at the Telegraph that went over 3 million people, but it was the best things of the week with a letter from the editor. And I think that was of value. That was also of marketing value because it led to subscriptions. That's where the blurred lines come in, but it was editorially focused. So I would say they're all good as long as you care about what you're writing. The problem with newsletters and when they can go wrong is if you forget the letter part of it. So you just write something that's not as if you're writing to one person. It's as if you're writing some kind of quite boring thing to everybody. You forget that it's a kind of privilege to have that opportunity to write and send something direct to somebody's inbox that they've chosen to sign up for, rather than you sort of spamming them with whatever or trying to get them through social media where they can miss it. And you take it seriously and you give it quality control. At the FT, there's always 2 pairs of eyes on every newsletter before it goes out. So there's no mistakes. They're all fact checked. Those are the kind of things. Doesn't matter small numbers or big numbers. That's what I'm saying. It's all good as long as you care about it. You take it seriously.
All right, Chris, what would you say to that? What would you add to that? Do you have a preference for the mass versus the very targeted?
Yeah, my experience tends to be more on the mass side of things. Being an email marketer I've worked at several different software companies, and the audiences tend to just be like our Trello newsletter is like 12 million, give or take. So it's like it's a very, very mass scale. I prefer I think I can entertain both sides of it, but I think it's a little easier, more straightforward, like the niche audiences, because I'm kind of a depth person rather than a breadth person. And sometimes I can struggle with finding the most common denominator to speak to 12 million different people. But I absolutely agree with everything Sarah said about you have to care about it. I've used different words, and that it's like you just have to remember that it's a privilege that you can talk to people in their inbox like this. And I think a lot of marketers forget that. So I definitely 100% am behind that. And a kind of a weird, unconventional, I'll say, feature of me being an email marketer is I try to send as few as possible, actually. And that forces the quality to be higher. I think there's a lot of diminishing returns with spamming people and just adding you don't even get like performance out of it either. So I try to send the fewest number possible and get away with that. And it served me well enough so far.
I will just say, when I think about the idea of the niche thing, I once, when I was at SmartRead, put out an email newsletter for surety bond producers. Like that was it. Like, so if you were to think about how narrow that was, there were not a lot of readers, but we put a lot of love into it because those people had real jobs and they were important. And I would just picture that surety bond producer. They were just as deserving of anything I would write as some, celebrity marketer. So
I think you get to embrace a lot of like niche language and certain things. Like you can, especially if you like understand the community, it's like much, I think, can also be more natural to communicate on a smaller scale like that. So that's why I kind of tend to like favor that, even though that's not what my career has been.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan? Because you've done like this business publication stuff. Are you more on the niche or on the mass side? Which do you prefer?
I'm a little jealous of the niche sometimes. I'm on the mass side with our local. Local's really hard, especially like a lot of the market. Getting people to care about local is a challenge, and then trying to use a 2-person team to provide that personal touch and the value and the context of why you should care about civic issues or about sports, community sports, or it's very challenging. But at the same time, that challenge is very rewarding if you can get a lot of people consistently to have a low churn rate, and to keep coming back every morning locally. So it's very hard, but we're having fun doing it on a local level. Again, I can't tell you when we do customer feedback or we do the surveys and we get we read through all the data and it's like, no more stories about development. Give me more stories about development. No more stories about, and so trying to interpret and really keep everybody happy is very, very difficult on a local level. And so that's one of the biggest challenges. And then just locally not having a ton of local media news sources to be able to check and reference and learn more and dive deeper with, again, only 2 individuals to make that content that much more interesting can be hard. But again, that's what it's hard can be fun sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Right, Leah, I'm going to start with you on my next question, just because, you have overseen like some launching some newsletters and some blogs with some very large audiences. Like, what do you think is the difference between newsletters that just kind of hover and just grow maybe a little bit and those that really take off exponentially? What really makes a newsletter like just, become something that's a habit from, 12 million people?
I think it's interesting. The larger it gets, the more tempting it is to use it as a platform or to kind of get swept up in that. But the trick is to continually look at the data and the surveys and just keep feeding your list the content that they want, so that they keep recognizing themselves in the content that they're reading. So as the Trello list has grown, it's actually gotten harder and harder to continually stay relevant and successful, because it's like expanding the number of people that you invite to a party. Their dietary preferences expand. It gets more and more complicated. So it's like, but you want to continue to maintain performance. So you really have to reflect on giving your list exactly what they're looking for and what they're resonating with, rather than making assumptions and starting to think like, we're this newsletter, this is our identity, and this is what we send you. It's actually, no, you, my list, are the identity that I'm serving, and you're telling me how you're growing and changing and what you're looking for, and I'm responding to your identity. So I think that's been really key in all of the newsletters that I've been working on as they grow, is just really responding rather than assuming.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions just popped up actually aligns with what I wanted to ask you about that. When you talk about using the technology, so I think for some of us who are producing like intense newsletters every day, like we have an idea in our head of what that means and that we're using this data and we use it to shape it. Walk us through, like, what does that look like? How are you mining this data? Like, how are you analyzing what you're getting from readers? And like, what are you doing in your newsletter? How are you segmenting? Like, what does that mean to you, right? When we say I use the data, I'm listening to the readers.
Yeah, I'd actually love to hear from Rani and Chris on the data, because they're day-to-day in the Trello newsletter now. But one thing that I would say to folks is to not overlook the humble reader survey, because data can tell you things, but it can't tell you the underlying long form answers. So I do really appreciate and love to use a reader survey maybe once or twice a year to also get those longer form answers and really get inside the minds of the people that read the newsletter.
Rani, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think, like Leah mentioned and Chris mentioned, like we have 12 million people it's going to, it's only growing. And while it's important to kind of, make sure we're doing content that makes sense for the inbox, we also really do want to make sense. It's content that people want to continue opening, right? So the obvious open rate, click rate, we are looking at the ebbs and flows of that. And as far as, what are we noticing in terms of subject line testing? Like, very, very simple things, we'll notice trends as far as, okay, like we're seeing less product emails being opened right now. That doesn't mean that dictates the entire year's schedule, what we're doing. Like, it's really just taking it on a bit of a micro level, understanding that people's habits towards your newsletter, towards your content, it does change quite more often than we'd like to believe. It can't, you can't relegate an entire year or entire season strategy just to a few data points. And so what we try to do is we do try to keep in mind, what's the season, what's the mood, what are certain trends going on. So while we do have like, okay, great, we have X amount of people opening up this type of subject line, that doesn't mean we neglect kind of our own observations of what's going on in our workplace on social media, because then we will try to choose how we want our readers to perceive us. In this question, it's also, you talk about, analytics. I think it's also kind of understanding seasonality as far as, are people going back to school? Are children going back to school? Are people entering the office again after a long time? So it's also not being reactive to the point of changing up your entire MO for your newsletter. It's really just trying to estimate the next 3 to 5 rather than the next 10 to 15, because it's really just going to change every single time. So even as you're a journalist, it's kind of like the news cycle. You're really going to have to accommodate, what's happening in the real world and what's happening with your product. We're a SaaS product. So that means, do we have an update coming up? Does it make sense to announce it at this time? So while we'll never get a data point saying, yes, we're ready for a new update, we can glean that if we're seeing a lack of interest in maybe, how to run a meeting. So it's kind of picking and choosing what you think your readers might be fatigued about and switching the script a bit. So yeah, I'd say it just really depends on the type of newsletter you have as well. For content newsletter, we get the privilege of being a bit more subjective how we do interpret data. But at the same time, we really do keep in mind the breadth of our audience to make sure it's never muddy. We do like to have a clear purpose each time.
So one thing I'm going to see if I can give an answer to this, Elaine too, who asked about, they're basically setting a brand new newsletter. And like, that's both a really scary place to be and also like a really wonderful place to be, because you've got no bad habits to break. So, I mean, the most important thing for me is that I ask people to sit down before they think about analytics to develop what I call their content value proposition, which is, why should I sign up for this newsletter? If you can't say in a sentence, like who is this for and what are they going to get out of it? So answer that question. And then the metrics that matter to you should be, are the people I want to reach, are they the ones signing up? Yes or no? Are more of them coming versus leaving? Yes or no? And then you look at opens and clicks. I think that as we get bigger newsletters, you can start to pick up on bigger patterns and things. But like at the stage that you're in, Elaine, I would say figure out what is the purpose and what is the value of this newsletter to the recipient. And then to me, then it's new subscribers, it's churn, it's opens, it's clicks, it's unsubscribes. And that's it. Like you don't want to over-engineer it when you're coming out of the gate. When you have like 3,000 subscribers, come hit me up and we can talk about like how you can start to segment out based on types of content and things like that. But at the very beginning, don't stress yourself too much. Focus on creating value. Worst answer ever, right? I did not tell you which numbers. And any good email platform will help you do that, right? Like, so if whatever email platform you choose one that will give you those basic analytics and a nice clean dashboard that's intuitive for you.
I'd also add that encouraging like qualitative data, like encouraging people to just reply. That was like a huge part of how Morning Brew kind of gauged who the audience was and what they wanted to see every day, was just like ending every email with like, what do you think, hit reply, or having that in a podcast or something. It's a really good way to just kind of build that community early on with your audience and understand kind of what they're expecting of you and what they like, what they didn't like. And it just makes them more loyal long-term because they feel like they know you and you care about them.
People really do reply, like, but you have to give the invitation. Like, you have to invite them to do it and give them something to grab onto.
I think also what Jenny was saying there is 100% right. And it's also asking the question. So if you put in your newsletter or whatever, contact us, they're unlikely to do it. But if you actually ask them a question of what did you like, what didn't you like, are we doing a good job, do you agree with written, then they're more likely to feel that, oh, that's a question I'd like to answer, and get in touch with you. Or what would you like to see more of, or something like that. I think that's really helpful.
So Leah, I want to ask you a quick question about Werk, which I think you just shared in a note with us as the panelist. I think this is actually, what you mentioned here is what I consider the most important email you ever send. And what is that email? What is that most important email, would you say?
I just sent it to this small group.
I thought you meant to share it, but so I'm like, okay, let's share it. It's a great idea.
So yeah, because my personal newsletter, I've been running it for a year, so I'm still in the new and growing camp there. The welcome email has been the most important part of my growth trajectory. So when I send the welcome email, it's very close and tied to the brand of the newsletter. So it's kind of quirky, and there's a lot of Spice Girls references and stuff like that, because I have a target market I'm going after. But more importantly, I thank them for subscribing, then ask them to do 3 things. I ask them to read past issues. If they're interested, I ask them to share it with another colleague or woman in content marketing they think might be interested. And I ask them to reply to me if they'd like to be interviewed in a future issue. So the newsletter actually is about interviews, and then I source new interviews from new subscribers. So it's just a growing flywheel of subscribers, shares, interviewees, and it's just started taking a mind of its own. And I just want to quickly note that this is a particular strategy of being a community-minded influencer. So you don't always have to have an opinion to have a newsletter. Creating a community via newsletter and amplifying the voices of others is another really great way. And that's was my choice to do that instead of just sending my thoughts. And so it also helps you grow your newsletter base, because you're just growing a community. They're the one and the same. So definitely use that welcome email if you're new to building a newsletter.
What I would add to that is, can I add something, Mary? I'm sorry. What I would also add to that, and just even in my experience in email marketing as well, is it's also one of the most engaged emails you will likely ever send. Almost everyone opens this email you send them. So you should be very intentional and deliberate with what you do with it.
Yeah, I think my open rate on my opening email is 72% or something. So you really want to take that moment if they're going to open it, say hi and make an impression.
It's all downhill from there, Leah. It's not really, right? But it is such a high one. And usually one of the other things I use we haven't talked about this much, but deliverability. So if I see a low open rate on that welcome email, that may not be a sign that there's something wrong with the content of my emails. That might be a sign that they're not getting it. So that's usually a flag for me to go investigate a little bit and see hey, they didn't even open the welcome. They're probably not going to get the next thing. So that's one of the ways I use that, is kind of a little watch for that. And again, that works on the scale that I produce the Managing Editor newsletter, you produce your newsletter. Leah, I don't know that the FT has time to look and see, oh, you didn't open the email, a personal outreach. And I was going to say, Ryan, so how do you use data? I mean, you talked about looking at that survey, but are you segmenting? Because the first thing I started thinking is, you said development, I want more development news, I want less. Do you segment out for people based on those interests, either using automation or what do you do?
Well, I appreciate, I forget who mentioned about the goal or brand value of what you're going to cover, and what we intentionally do not segment out, because we believe that people locally need to be more aware and interested in things that are outside of their neighborhood block or their go-to friend group. And we think that the more they're aware and excited about these other things, that they'll lead to stronger, better connected communities, and they'll be more, fired up about where they live. So we don't segment out, which makes it even, again, more challenging to figure out and look at data to create a content balance that provides a little something in there for everyone locally. When I look at the feedback, and you're exactly right, I love the long form survey responses that allow you more, to be able to really dive deeper. But I struggle personally, and I wish, because I want to hear from like all our non-super consumers. I feel like so often when you get data responses, they're from the folks that open our email every single day. They want us to see improvement. And I want all the folks that don't necessarily want to take the time to take the survey, because it's good, but it could be a little bit better. And if it was a little bit better, this is how I would care about it. So since we can't get them to do the surveys, we'll look at just performance, like click-through and impressions. And one of the things we're really focused on locally is trying, instead of, our addressable market in Greenville, South Carolina is only so big with the population. So we really focus on, average daily opens versus just our subscriber list, because if we can continue to grow those opens locally, that means that we're providing enough of a balance of topics to keep them interested to come back every day. So again, local has its own challenges.
Mm-hmm. I actually love that you said that again, but it's interesting because it's the journalist in me that finds that heartening, because I think this is one of the dangers of that we've talked about a lot with regard to social media. It's like, okay, the Facebook algorithm just keeps feeding you more of exactly what you want and nothing that counters your viewpoint. Are we in danger of doing something even worse with our email newsletters, right? Like if we're not careful about how they get curated. And this is one example of this. I have a friend that runs an email newsletter company that uses AI to drive automation to choose my selections. And I actually agree. It's like at this point, I've been looking at this thing and he gives me that email is now programmed. It gives me exactly what I want every week. It never surprises me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
there's none of that curated experience of whoa, I didn't realize that was important to me. It's always going to give me what I said I was interested in before. And that's a danger. I mean, I guess, does anybody else worry about that with email? I mean, and thinking about it that way, the same way we've had endless conversations about social media. Sarah, please. Yeah, I would love to hear your take on this.
I think this is one of the really big issues that's been coming up with newsletters recently, is that sort of pull between personalization and curation. So people have got this real strong idea that we need to personalize everything. And that's fine, send me an email that says, "Dear Sarah," fine. Although I actually don't think everybody does like that. It depends on the kind of person. In fact, at the Telegraph, I really think there's probably quite a lot of people who wouldn't like that. They'd prefer, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or whatever. Depends on your readership. But if you always give people things that you think they'll like, you're just not opening up their world at all. And when I used to pick, and this was from a marketing email that went to all the subscribers at the Telegraph, and you'd pick the sort of best of the week, I always made sure I picked some things that they might not have seen and they might like, that, maybe a culture article that they wouldn't necessarily have come across themselves, because otherwise I'm just giving them more of what they want and they're not expanding. And they're also maybe not getting the value of your publication, because you want to go, there's a reason why you should stay with us, because we offer all this stuff. We don't just offer you these things you already want. So I think this is a real tension. And it really depends on who is running your newsletter or a newsletter program or your emails, on which way they're going to go. But whenever I ask people, a lot of people do want that curated, because you get something different. And I get the New York Times one, which is, here are the stories for you. And there is rarely something on that I want to read, because either it's a topic I've read elsewhere, or I want to read something that's a bit different. I get so many newsletters, I don't need to read more of what I've already read particularly. I want to read something that's a bit different. And sometimes, yeah, it's true, sometimes you find that on social, because someone else will have tweeted it or something, someone that you'll just see it in your stream, but of course you won't always see it. But I do think that going entirely down that path is a bit dangerous, because you're in the echo chamber, you're in a different kind of echo chamber, but also not as interesting or exciting.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, I want to hear your take on this as the other person on this panel that has overseen lots of B2B niche newsletters, where your job is in fact to tailor it to what these people are expecting to get versus what they need to hear. How did you approach that back back in that role, or how do you think about it now?
Yeah, definitely. I think, at Industry Dive and at Morning Brew, people would ask, like, are you guys going to get into segmentation and personalization? And every time we said no, because that's part of, going back to what our content like value prop is we're providing that curation. Like, we're telling you what you need to know. You should feel a sense of accomplishment when you finish the newsletter, because you're like, now I am up to date because Morning Brew or Retail Brew or Industry Dive told me everything I need to know about the industry or the business world today. And the second you get into that like personalization and segmentation, like Sarah was saying, then you've just totally changed what your value prop is. Not to say that that's like, there's nothing wrong with it. It has its place. But if your stance is I'm a curator and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, then you have to deliver on that. And you have to like be the last line of defense and the source of truth of that for people.
So one thing I used to do at Smart Brief, and I don't know those of you if you guys think about this when you do your newsletters, like I would have the same story, right? In many cases, like there would be some news item, some piece of legislation, some policy development. And my suite of briefs that I oversaw like included, say, the oil and gas industry, and it also included the biofuels industry. So I had to go and write like teaser copy that pulled out, like it was kind of like I used to tell my team, it's like, is it accurate? Is it relevant? Is it, is it interesting? It's like and accurate being the first thing that we covered, right? Is this true? And then the relevance, like, can you spin this? Like, is this matter to this audience? And that last piece, now you get to play with the writing and now you get to have some fun. That relevance piece and what we chose to spin, like assuming people didn't click through and all they saw was like our spin on it, there's a lot of power in that. Like, and I got nervous at times with like, if we are positioning it this way, are we doing these people a service? I don't know, Jenny, was that ever part of like, did y'all ever have discussions like that?
Yeah, it would be interesting because sometimes, like, for example, using Retail Brew, if there would be, some big news in the retail space, how our Retail Brew writers would write about that. You're writing about it, for that retail professional. You can use different lingo. You can use, you're coming at it from like the more business angle, but then sometimes that was big enough news to be in Morning Brew. So how can we kind of, we tried to really be honest with ourselves and not force it, like for the sake of just being like, we want to link to our own content because then we get more traffic. Like we'd have to really make sure like, yes, this is definitely like worthy of being included in the Morning Brew newsletter and making sure that we are presenting it in a way that like we're still staying true to what the Morning Brew audience expects of us. So it most of the time did mean like writing a completely separate story and just being like originally reported by Retail Brew, and like maybe taking out some of the details to like weave into the story, but usually the story is not going to be the same to the consumer side. So taking that different approach and making sure that we're not just, like rinsing and repeating, but really like tailoring it to each individual audience.
What about the Trello team? Like what do these kinds of conversations happen when you're deciding what to include and how to frame it? Do you worry about that?
So
go ahead, Chris. I'll follow you.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, we don't do a lot of actual like segmentation on our newsletter. We found like we're a productivity tool. It's to help you manage work and things like that. And so it's like that doesn't lend itself necessarily to like, and like all our blog content is focused on productivity or using Trello. So like we're just not set up properly like to really like do meaningful segmentation. But I'm definitely part of the camp of like not overly personalizing, because there's definitely in the market some like scary stories of not funny things, but just bad things that go wrong when you're not careful about how you personalize stuff. And I also don't want to like create this like self-fulfilling prophecy for people. Like for example, when someone signs up for Trello, say I'm on a marketing team, say I'm signing up, and there's a place where you put in how you're planning on using Trello, and we try to help you get it going quicker. So if you put like marketing team, like at the same time, I don't want to assume a year or two down the road that this same person is definitely doing marketing, because that's not the case. People change all the time. So we try to like, we don't really like do this kind of segmentation thing. And the other side, and I'm going to call back to like our talk about data, is something I've always personally done is like, say we'll have like our metrics or goals we care about. I don't just say like, oh, this number of people clicked on our email. It's like, no, this number of people found something interesting in it. And it's like you frame it in a way that benefits the person and helps you avoid these like issues like Jenny was alluding to of like linking to your own content to drive more traffic. That doesn't benefit your users at all, your readers. They don't care about that. So it's like if you frame your goals and your metrics and stuff in a way that benefits them. We have a saying at Atlassian, don't F the customer. And so that's one way to go about it, is like be mindful of like what actually benefits them. And I'll let Rani add some color to that.
You totally, I basically going to repeat what you're saying. I think a lot of it is just like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like for our content newsletters, we really have a keen eye to making sure that it is not it's diverse enough in terms of content to kind of hit any type of person reading it. Also acknowledging that we are gaining new readership every new week. So even if we were to customize it to who's reading it, it just really depends on who they are, who they're forwarding it to. It just, we don't want to become a niche within a niche right now, which is already a productivity tool, but then it's like, oh, it's only for managers, or it's only for, leadership. So it's really making sure we're always hitting somebody in this, this giant 12 million person party. From a past experience, I used to run email marketing for a food delivery startup. And we did an experiment where we would send folks who would order one type of food cuisine information about that cuisine under the assumption of they would enjoy it more. Totally debunked. And it's interesting because all these assumptions you make about why people are reading your newsletter, again, it's an assumption. There's no data behind it. So simply understanding or asking your audience why they're clicking something, what makes them like it, makes you make a more informed decision, because just based off of one data point of this was opened, let's customize it. It's not the whole story. And so it's really getting to know your audience from a holistic perspective and not just one area of their life.
See, and this is where I do find this really interesting, because we've kind of like a lot of the best practices around newsletters, we've moved away from like demographic behavior. That's that question of like, you asked me if I'm a marketer on a marketing team and I said yes, so now you're going to give me marketing stuff. And then we've shifted to supposedly the more sophisticated approach is using psychographic data. It's like, oh, you liked this food item, so I'm going to suggest this other food item. I mean, anybody who is a heavy Amazon user knows that technology still has a lot of challenges, because I get suggested a lot of things. I've also periodically, I don't know how many of you guys go look at your data and see who Google thinks you are, right? Like, so now, like, I mean, we should thank our European counterparts for this now that we actually have some insight into this tracking that they're doing. But like, it couldn't have been more off base who they thought I was demographically. Right. But like, they were trying to make these guesses about what I would like. They thought I was a guy because I was really into financial news. I don't know if you know that, Sarah, but only men likes financial news. It's like, no, I'm into economics and financial markets. They assumed that I was Black because of my zip code. They did let, it was just wild. It was wild. And so I would get targeted with the strangest things. And I will just tell you, it didn't get any better when people started doing it in other places, right? Like the things I get suggested on. So I don't know, how do you guys feel about that? I don't know, Ryan, you talk about trying not to segment at all. Like, what do you see as the sort of benefits and perils to this approach?
I think Jenny nailed it. And I think that that's what Morning Brew's done so well, is that, and we, if I'm selling an advertiser, it's just that the brand is known to have trust and loyalty and a one-on-one relationship with that newsletter and that audience, that kind of like the old, I just think back of like my great grandparents on the front porch reading the newspaper from start to finish. And they trusted that by the time they were done with that last piece of paper, that if it was important, then the local newspaper was going to make sure that they told them what was going on. And I think that Morning Brew has done such a good job with that. And it's like, hey, if it's important, it's going to be in here, and we're going to tell you, we're going to narrate and tell you why it's important. And that's what the brand is known for. That's what the loyalty has. And that what we've done locally is try to create that same reputation to not, further segment audiences, and again, celebrate and build a brand that's known for telling you other things that you should check out. And there's value in that. And that's why they're coming back to us, because again, we're not just saying, here's everything again, that you probably already read somewhere else, or that you probably already know about. The only challenge that we have, and I think we hit on that a little bit with the last question, is that if I'm going to touch on development, I better do it in an interesting way so that the development community doesn't read it and go, look, these guys don't have a clue what they're talking about, because there's absolutely, that's so on the top, skimming it, that it's not deep enough. So I think figuring out a better angle, again, so that you're relevant to that audience that does understand it well, and also that you're not, and that you're not going so granular that you're alienating the audience that doesn't understand it. But at the end of the day, again, it's just about, I think with the brand is trusted to introduce you to things that you otherwise wouldn't know, and that trust is there and is built.
All right, I'm going to go, we've only got a few minutes left here, and I'm going to go round robin on this and you just get a quick answer. I want to know from each of you, what is your favorite email newsletter, like your habit, that is not one that you produce, right? This can't be your own email. I know y'all all know better than that, but I'm going to just go around. What's your favorite? What do you read faithfully and why? Sarah?
Okay, there's quite a few, so I'm quickly trying to think of something you said very quickly. I'm actually going to go for two British journalists. Well, I really like the WTF Dave Pell's newsletter, which I think is great. Me and everyone else. But there's two British journalists who do very different newsletters. One of them is called Helen Lewis, who does something called the Blue Stocking. She actually writes for The Atlantic now. It's a feminist newsletter, but she picks really good articles that you very often haven't seen anywhere else. That's what I really like about it. And it's full of attitude, and it's you feel it's worth your time, but it's short. And the other one is by a guy called Ian Leslie, and it's called The Ruffian. And he does the same kind of thing, quite eclectic, often political, but cultural. And he will pick good things, but he also will write really interesting stuff at the top. So very much recommended, quite niche.
Oh, good. You like, so it sounds to me, you like voice and you want to be surprised. You want. Good. All right, Jenny, what's your favorite?
Good question. I honestly don't read that many newsletters religiously, which is sad to admit. But I think like taking kind of a non-news angle, I really like Girls Night In. It's a weekly, like more community kind of focused newsletter with like just cool recommendations of like books to read, articles, like things to do, that just kind of has like a really distinct and I think unique kind of voice and take on things. And I just like them as a company. I think they're just a cool company.
Yeah, yes, they don't have to be like work related, I promise. You can say whichever you like. All right, Chris, what about you?
I'm gonna steal Sarah's style here and do two quick ones that I do read, and they're not even necessarily newsletters, but one of them is, it's called Stratchery, I think that's how you pronounce it, by this guy named Ben Thompson. I work in tech. I'm very interested in what's going on with tech, and that's what he covers from like a policy impact angle. I really like that. It comes out every Tuesday. I usually read that. Then the other one I like is he's an author at a venture capital fund that focuses on sustainable and ethical investing. His name's Morgan Housel. He has a it's mostly financial related, but it's just the depth with which he considers psychology and all these different kind of fields and how it comes together in the world of finance and money. It just blows my mind. And he has a book too that's really great. So that one comes out every other week. It's called Collaborative Fund. I never not open that one.
All right, Ryan, what about you?
From a consumer entertainment standpoint, I like Morning Brew's go-to daily newsletter.
Nope, you're not allowed to say your own.
It's not his own. He's 6 a.m. City.
Yeah, no, that's Jenny.
All right,
that's Jenny's background. Like, I like Morning Brew. Again, the business consumer in me loves it. I think that they have great voice, and the context they provide is very different and fun. And then I just love the Obsessions newsletter from Quartz. I have a lot of fun with whatever they're diving into, seeing all the different tidbits and way that they kind of educate you with it. So
cool. Rani, what about you?
I also have two quick ones. One of them is called The Gist, GIST. It gives you the gist of what's happening in the world of sports. I am not very into sports, but I would love to understand more. So I can talk to my fiance and be like, sports. So that one gives it's meant for people who just don't know much, but want to learn more. It's easy to read language and references as to what does that mean. So I really appreciate that. I also really love, it's called The Skint, and it's New York City specific. And it comes out once a week, and it gives you things that are $15 to free to do in New York City that week, to find in any borough. So that I open every week, because especially right now, looking for things to do. And lastly, I will plug Leah's newsletter. I really do enjoy her newsletter. It's content marketing, and it's nice. It also looks super beautiful. So if you want something easy on the eyes, I'd say Werk is great.
Cool. All right, Leah, your turn.
Thanks, Rani. You're very nice. In terms of like a thought leader that inspires me, Anne Handley's newsletter is just beautiful. She's just makes you feel like she's speaking exactly to you. And I've only met her once, so I don't know how she does it. I also think on the large scale, I do really enjoy Pocket's curated newsletter. Every time they do a great job of sending me things that I wouldn't have read yet. And I consume media for a job. So I think that's really interesting. And so I always learn something new with Pocket.
Cool. What about you, Seth? Do you read newsletters? You got a favorite?
I do. I have two quick ones as well. One of them being The Click, which was a newsletter I subscribed to originally for like work reasons, but then turned into something that I loved reading, even if it was just to hop in to see their little bit of trivia. That's a daily one that comes out. That's a lot of fun. And then my second one that I just subscribed to this week because of Newsletter Fest is the Daily Memphian, their morning edition, because I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. So excited to start reading that more. And I've read 2 emails so far and I'm loving it, just to keep up to date with what's going on in the city around me.
Cool. Well, so I'm going to do my 2, and then I'm going to hand this to you, Ashley, and you get to share yours, and you get to wrap us up and kick us out.
Right.
So one of mine was actually going to be Anne Handley, so now I have to have a substitute. Anne's amazing, and she puts so much love in that, and I would say I learned a lot about writing email newsletters from Anne. Like, she doesn't act like there's some quick tips or tricks to making great newsletters. She puts the time in, and she puts the love in, and you just feel it in the newsletter. So that was a habit for me. But so the other 2 that I would add, there's a guy named Hung Lee who's in London, and he writes a recruiting technology curated newsletter. And it's, you would say on one end it's fairly niche, but it's actually, he's grown it from an idea, to like tens of thousands of subscribers in just a few years. And what I love about it is that, yes, it's curated, and yes, it's stories about recruiting tech, but what he's really made it is like the best place. If you read nothing but that newsletter every Sunday when it drops, you will know what is going on in terms of the future of work. He brings in it's a cultural perspective. There's a political perspective. It sounds like him. It doesn't sound like he copied and pasted. It sounds like, this is Hung, you're having a beer, and he was like, can you believe this new immigration policy? This is going to wreck the tech companies in London. He's based in London. He's a Chinese national, and he's got a Dutch passport. So, I mean, the perspective there is like quite global. I love his newsletter. And then the other one that I really like is my friend Lori Rudiman puts out one. She runs the Punk Rock HR podcast, and she's got a book called Betting on You that's all about sort of figuring out what to do with your life and your career. And her emails are also very similar. She's coming from that perspective of HR and the workforce, and she'll pick up these political bits, and it's a strong opinion. It's a strong opinion. Like, you either love her or you hate her. Like, the level of like complaints she gets, like, she doesn't look at her unsubscribes as a problem. I'll put it that way. It's kind of like the blue stocking email. It's like, this is an unabashedly feminist HR lady. Like, you're going to take it or you're going to leave. So I love her stuff.
All right.
Over to you, your turn.
Okay, so I'm going to reference 2 speakers that we've had this week. I might have had a newsletter crush on them before I asked them to be speakers. One is Margot Aaron. And she has That Seems Important, like thatseemsimportant.com. That's easy to get to. And her personality, like, she talks about marketing, and she has a YouTube show that she does with Hillary Weiss, and it's called Ham Y'all. And it's Hillary and Margot yell at websites. And her newsletter is just plain text. It's super casual style, and it's always long, but it's always entertaining. And it's just like almost stream of consciousness narrative story. And it just pulls me in because it feels like my friend just sat down to write me along, like, hey, let's catch up on my week. And she's working on a book. So she's like sharing things about that as she goes. So you just feel like you made a new friend, and that friend is bringing you into their life and teaching you things along the way. And the subject lines are always like, like, I'm still not over this or something. So she brings you in. And then Anam Hussein's Below the Fold. I can highly recommend. And the intention of that newsletter, she spoke yesterday about positioning your newsletter, like managing like it's a product. And I think she would have been a great addition to this discussion as well, because she has a past as a HubSpot marketer and now is running an editorial newsletter. And that newsletter's intention is to make you aware of headlines that aren't making it in your news feed or above the fold in the news. And so it's like, here is what is going on that you probably haven't seen. And here's what, like, if there's an action you could take, what you could do about it. And so it just really deep dives. So it's a curated newsletter, but the news is in the newsletter instead of the links that you're going to. So I really enjoyed that. And I've also enjoyed this conversation because I feel like that it's part of an ongoing dialogue that we're going to see. It was interesting to have Eric Barnes of the Daily Memphian earlier in the week talking about how he had seen in his career span the wall between sales and journalism kind of just go down. And he talked about like the historic New York Times, like suddenly allowing those departments to be on the same floor, or putting them like at the Daily Memphian, they have a marketer in, and it's not to change the content, but it's to change the way in which the content headline is delivered, or things like that. So that I feel like having been trained as a journalist who just kind of rode the wave of the change of digital as it happened, that there's so many techniques you can borrow, and that editorial style newsletters are really resonating right now with people, and that brands are recognizing that using a media type model is beneficial to them because they become more than the product. They become the deliverer of helpful information to them. So that is what inspired me to let us have this conversation. I feel like we should get together like once a month and be like, can you believe what happened? But I do think like that newsletters in their own way, I think I studied literature in college, and there was this like theory of the novel, and that the novel was a place where multiple worldviews could collide. And I think that conversations like this and newsletters that do what we were talking about earlier, which is not segment or not like say we're only going to be about this, they allow for multiple voices to have dialogue and to engage and to make the recipient like expand their worldview, right? About one particular thing or about multiple things. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us today and kind of sharing your unique stance and your newsletters. And I would love to keep the conversation going. So if you want to hop in our Slack, we'd love to have you, but no pressure there. That's all I have. Anybody else have one last minute thing to say? I don't think we had any questions left unanswered from the attendees, but this went live on YouTube and it will be there. So I'll share the link with everyone. But we'll also be sending out like follow-up newsletters to Newsletter Fest attendees, letting them get the replay and making short social clips for you to share with your audiences as well. If you feel like there was a moment of particular brilliance, which I feel like there were many of during this conversation. So extra thank you to Mary Ellen for hosting. It's been a pleasure to sit back a little bit. I went to dinner with my husband the other night and he was like, "You're not talking." And I was like, "I don't need to talk anymore."
Yeah, this was fun. This was really fun. So thank you. And I love the fact that you all brought so many great diverse perspectives to this.
Thank you. All right. We shall awkwardly goodbye from all over the world.
Bye.